So we've just completed the first iteration of our study on Iron, Bronze, and Silver levels of play. We have identified some of the tendencies here. We've watched VODs of how this level plays out. The point of this study, of course, was to learn how to translate theory to Iron, Bronze, and Silver, so we can properly draft for them. Players do generally fall into these tendencies. We are going to help them improve out of their long term, but to help a team who plays at IBS, you have to meet them where they're at first, right? We've determined laning is sloppy, macro is sloppy, team fights are sloppy. Big surprise, right? So it means high kill games, it can mean long games, but ultimately how these games work is that a team snowballs out of control, they probably throw a few times, they're just using their big gold buffer to win team fights because the random spontaneous fights that are caused in IBS are the driving force of the game. If you can respond to more fights than your opponent, you're probably more advantaged, right? So we are desiring in all contexts strong laning, high scaling, strong catch tools, strong split push power. Right? We want to give our players simple champions that they understand. They can always think about the game plan of their own champions. They're not stupid. We've seen IBS players try to execute dives. We've seen them try to execute flanks. But we need the comp identity to be as simple as possible, right? We do not want to give them control comps. We don't even really want to give them aggro comps. They need to be able to team fight. We want to give them initiators to help them team fight. Make it as simple as possible. Give them as few variables as possible to think about. We want to draft multiple carries at once in case any random lane collapses, because remember, our laning isn't refined yet. We're not great laners just yet. Any of us could randomly lose lane if we're playing on an IBS team, right? So tanks lose like a little bit of value because we want to have more carries in our comp, but whatever. Matchups generally don't matter because our matchup fundamentals are not developed. Matchups swing in random directions, right? Stat checkers run rampant in top lane. Weak laning is not necessarily a gate in mid lane, whereas it usually would be everywhere else because win lane, win game is an obvious trend. That's the one situation where counter picks do matter. If you are a weak laner, you need to be counter pick, so you can confirm that you're playing into a matchup that doesn't just crush you like a stat check top lane, like especially top lane IBS, where Mordekaiser is like a dominant champion, right? We do actually have another situation where matchups matter. That's if your champion is fundamentally better into a certain class of champion. You have to, if you don't get the kind of matchup you need, that champion might be synergy reliant. Think Rumble, who would prefer to combo with his ultimate if he's not played into a like melee mid, or Swain AD carry, who probably wants an engage support if he's not being played into engage. Stuff like that, right? Mechanical prodigies do exist. There are players who just have like big... There are players who have hands but no brain. They don't have perfect hands though, or they would be higher in solo queue because they would just be crushing everything, right? So a mechanically demanding champion is not appropriate for IBS if they literally have nothing to fall back on, like a lot of low CDs or a lot of auto attacks. Otherwise, you can play these champions. Like Yasuo is not a bad champion inherently for IBS players to play if they full on main it. As controversial as that may seem, like they can execute it. He does have high win rates in these brackets, right? So what are the specific gates for this level of play? Pure tempo champions are garbage because we're going to experience throws. We don't want, like, we're not going to stay ahead. Bad champions. The inability to abruptly join fights is bad. Like Narbar, we can't have that when fights just break out like that, right? We actually need to specify that champions fall off in IBS if they lose specifically teamfight effectiveness as a carry threat. We do not want to use game plans that are fundamentally based around mid-game macro. Vulnerability to jungle ganks is more pronounced because these players are insane, right? So stacking mechanics are good. Like, what's good? Stacking mechanics are good. Overall gold is higher, so champions who scale well are good. Catch tools are going to find targets. Catch tools are like the number one thing that we value. We expect tools to be used frivolously. Like, we see players use all 5 flashes for 1 kill. We want low cooldowns wherever possible. We like global tools because we want to get to the fights first. They're random. They're crazy. Okay. Before we go into the first drafts of our actual IBS tier lists, here's what we concluded. In top lane, stat stick juggernauts dominate, right? Top lane is the highest risk role in theoretical play, so it's hard to avoid interaction sometimes. IBS players like to fight a lot. They're not going to avoid interaction, so you throw a Warwick up there, and it's going to go very well for the Warwick player, usually. Strong output is almost entirely determined by raw stats up here, right? Split push becomes a very dominant property as a top laner. Pure tanks, as we mentioned, are weaker. By having a weaker lane, they can typically get locked in place by the split pusher, and They're obviously not useless, and they obviously do have value, but whenever you have a theoretically powerful tank, they usually drop in priority like a little bit in IBS. Right? Ranged top laners are hit by the gank vulnerability gate that we mentioned earlier. Junglers are very likely to spam gank relentlessly, waiting for completely inappropriate amounts of time for their window. Dominant properties are solo or extended gank potential, because their laners might not always follow up properly and they're not sophisticated on their ganks. We want snowball threat, dual potential, or unusual pick or CC value, right? Some players do embrace pure full clears. We have seen IBS junglers just go for counter invades, stuff like that, but they tend to get snowballed on. Ganks are not sophisticated. They look for position, not enemy HP, not enemy cooldowns, not ally availability. So if you need help generating your first kill, or you're really exposed to counter ganks, because we're obviously not tracking enemy jungler either, that tends to be a weaker jungler. So we had we'll talk about like Zed and stuff when we actually get to the lists, right? Early clear vulnerability is not punishable. Invades are very infrequent, especially for kills. Low health doesn't matter. You just need a good mid game and good ganks. You will get to the mid game, right? But clear speed also can't matter, because we throw away our tempo like that, like all the time. Mid lane, early kill threat and roam potential matter down here. There are more opportunities for safe scaling than top lane because it's easier to avoid interaction. So the dominant properties for this role, a lot of roam potential, catch potential, of course, jungle setup, pick potential, scaling. The assassins tend to dominate because in the mid lane, they're better than the jungle. They have more opportunities for finding random kills, right? They're not waiting to gank somebody. They're laning against somebody who can make a lot of mistakes. So if we have simple assassins that can shove, roam, kill, that accelerates the pace of the game, and that's a good thing in IBS. Right? Pre-6 vulnerability is irrelevant. So we actually see champions like Zillion, Swain performing well because they neutralize these assassins. Post-6 vulnerability is really, really, really bad, because that's when you start to eat like Fizz ultimates, because people are playing Fizz down here. Right? Okay, bot lane. Kill lanes are the best. Scaling is good, yes, but not at the expense of a weak lane. We want to be able to kill people. Again, snowball, snowball, snowball. Have this gold buffer. We're going to throw. We don't understand macro, so we want our gold buffer. Dominant properties, snowball potential, catch, scaling, easy teamfight execution, right? Any champion overly dependent on a partner is much weaker if that dependence is complex, because IBS supports aren't going to know what you're doing. Remember, they're wrapped up in their game plan. They don't know exactly how to help you, but if the dependence is for engage, if you need them to engage, we can handle that. That mandatory synergy is fine. So poke lanes are barely viable. The positioning is poor. We're going to expose ourselves to these common kill lanes. It's just not kind of what we're going for. Support is a weird one. Scaling, this is the role where scaling is best. Supports are getting unusual amounts of gold. They're participating in more kills. Econ is like shockingly high down here. So we want catch tools, we want good damage, we want time insensitive utility, which is utility that doesn't require a reaction check. We want good natural durability from melee, right? Mage supports tend to be dominant down here. Engage supports do tend to die a lot, but we mentioned we want an initiator. They could be necessary for the mid game, so if we have something that's unusually durable and does damage, it's totally fine. Only Blitzcrank gains extra value from being a hook support. Everything else has, like, normal catch. These players aren't stupid, right? High vulnerability is a damning property. If you are a low durability melee or a low self-heal ranged champion, you will just die and repeat, and you will not contribute that much. The only way you can compensate for this, if you have low self-heal, you can just kill them back. There's very few supports that can actually just do that right away, right? Supports completely dependent on the performance of specifically their AD carry are weaker. Low scaling wardens are completely reactive and low impact in lane. But again, team fights are the biggest thing that matter here. Supports tend to be able to neutralize a lot better, or like random scaling supports win their lane unexpectedly and stuff. So this is the role where we will see the most like weak laners that still get away with it. Like the 2v2 is complex for IBS players. So with all that said, these are our premises. These are what we've been studying. This is, of course, the first draft of our Iron study. That's as far as we've gotten right now. I will be putting teams through IBS leagues to confirm these hypotheses. But for the short term, here is our first draft of the tier lists that we wanted to see, right? This is our AD carry one. Jhin is at the top. I mean, he's got kill threat. He's got catch tools that nobody else has. It feels weird to see Jhin, of all champions, like at the top of a tier list. Like, at the end of the day, this is kind of where it is. Weird, notable things. Caitlyn is dropped in priority at this level of play because she's a tempo champ in a poke lane, although she is still reasonably effective. Most of our respectable champions are champions who will perform well in the team fights, but are going to have a weak lane to compensate, and are not as likely to generate those snowballs. This is the bot lane list. Varus isn't top. Yep, Varus isn't quite as... I mean, the numbers don't lie, right? We did have to use a lot of solo queue statistics for this. We didn't blindly... If we blindly followed solo queue statistics, Yasuo would be all the way down here, but of course we have access to synergy in competitive play for IBS. We can pick appropriate supports for him. Varus simply does not snowball as consistently as the other two. The value that he gives, like he's a good stat stick, right? He's a great stat stick. But he's not as immediately explosive. That's pretty much it. Our jungle list looks like this. This is the one that we just finished making before I started going on my whole spiel about this. Where Rammus, I really cannot express how, like, absolutely absurd Rammus is. I really cannot express how absurd Rammus is at this level of play when his clear isn't being punished and stuff, right? So yeah, this is the list that we just finished. A lot of like, and so Zed, Kha'Zix, and Talon made it down here because as assassins, they're dependent on their first kill. We would expect people to be mispositioned all the time. They do misposition all the time, but these champions aren't always finding those opportunities to misposition. Again, because we're looking for solo gank potential, because we're not looking for appropriate ganks, we're just looking for extension ganks. These are squishy champions. It is just harder to execute on them compared to something like a Xinjiao. And the assassins who do perform are the ones who just spontaneously kill somebody and can make it out in a team fight. They're not as committal as these ones, right? It's weird to call Talon committal. Kind of not, but yeah. And I know Graves being low feels wrong, but he is a tempo champion. He doesn't win. He really doesn't. This is our mid lane list. The IBS mid lane list is favoring a lot of early game burst champions, a lot of assassins. It is really unusual what is top heavy. We still have these like two complex things. We need to resort things a little bit. There's a lot, like, remember, we're not being punished for our pre-6 as hard in this lane, so for some reason, bewilderingly, things like Quinn do just win. Like, Quinn mid doesn't, it's a trend where everyone's mispositioning, but simultaneously, no one's pressing advantages as hard as they could, right? We're not pressing advantages as hard as we can. So it's like this weird paradox of you kill more easily, but you're not killed as easily. Like, you know what I mean? It's so strange. That's true. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, Galio fell a little bit for being a utility champion, but then why is Orange? You know what? Galio got missed. Galio got missed when we started to move utility champions up. That's pretty much it. Galio got missed because we placed him before we determined, oh, wait a minute, mid laners are not that vulnerable pre-6 compared to top laners. And so Galio, like, yeah, you know what? I would agree with you. I would agree with you. We could probably put Galio up here a little bit. And Irelia is weird, yeah, but she did fall under our, I mean, it's two things. Irelia fits our criteria of a mechanical champion who, if she fucks something up, can just start auto-attacking you, and her cooldowns aren't, like, that long. And it also just boils down to Irelia players do statistically win at this elo. So, since we have a reasonable explanation for why that might be, I'm inclined to trust the win rate. I'm inclined to trust it. The support list looks like this. We have a lot of mage supports at the top. We have some shockingly high scaling things here, like Sona, Taric. They're getting absurd amounts of gold. The 2v2, since it's more complex, even though we're playing kill lanes, it's weird. It's like the support... I can't... Like, I still feel weird trying to explain this one. Because, like, by all means, Sona should not be thriving here. But I have watched directly the POV of IBS Sona players, and, like, they're just winning. They're just not dying in lane. Even if their 80 carry dies to everything, they're neutralizing way more than they should, right? They're poking at inappropriate times and not getting engaged onto. But, like, it just happens. So basically, you'll see a lot of self-sufficient supports up here. Nami is unusually able to aggress in the 2v2 because she's not being punished as consistently. The engaged supports who actually are strong are champions who have massive AoEs or who have heavy damage to back themselves up, which is why we see the lower durability or lower damage ones down here instead, right? Serrano not punish enemy drafts hard enough. I mean, it's like, kind of, yes, but remember, we don't expect Renata Ultimate to be used as perfect counter-engage. We're not expecting people to execute their archetypical matchups exactly, but she's still excellent. It's just she doesn't... She makes some champions really hard to deal with. She does win some lanes. She's not getting punished as hard, so her laning is better. I just wouldn't put her up here because she doesn't scale as well as the other enchanters, and she doesn't bully as hard as the other, like, as the mages, right? So that's pretty much it. And obviously, again, everything here is a first draft. I can be outright wrong about some placements because we're just trying to develop an understanding of how champions are changed by being an IBS. And lastly is the top lane list, which is the first one we did, actually, which is why you'll still see the too complex stuff here. You just stat check people. You just want to try to stat check people in top lane. Stat check, split push, and then you're a good champ. Like, and the respectable ones are the ones that have higher complexity in team fights, the ones that have, like, lower agency in lane. Darius makes it down here solely because when he gets to the team fight phase, he's a lot more conditional than his other Juggernaut peers. Stuff like that, right? Those are our lists. And yeah, I'm ready to change everything. But I feel reasonably confident that we have developed the, like, because we developed these through watching games, through talking to people, like getting some perspectives from actual players in this elo range. I'm reasonably confident that even if some of the minute details aren't perfect, we have generally figured out how IBS play works. I will put it to the test. I'm excited for it.